The wine glass trembled just slightly when she called me adorable for checking the company's finances. Still, I smiled, folded my napkin, not my pride, as her voice danced through my home, claiming she'd modernized my business. The chandelier caught the glass like it caught my patience. Fragile, bright, sharp. While she mistook applause for ownership, I made one quiet call to the lawyer she didn't know existed. The same hands that once built this company now locked her out of it. That's when I realized she married my son, not my control. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The laughter at the Parker family's backyard party rippled like clinking glass, bright, brittle, and just a little too sharp. The evening sun stretched long across the manicured lawn, catching on crystal drinkware and polished smiles. Eleanor Parker, Ellie to everyone but her daughter-in-law, sat at the far end of the table, watching her son Nathan and his wife Lauren entertain their guests with the kind of charm that required an audience. "Mom, you remember what I said about those financial statements?" Lauren's voice carried, light and mocking. "It's adorable that you still check them. The company's gone so digital now, I'm not sure you'd even find the login page." A burst of laughter, not cruel, just enough to make the air sting. Eleanor smiled faintly, folding her napkin. Her gray-blue eyes didn't flicker. She'd been underestimated before, by competitors, bankers, and even her own family. But tonight, something in Lauren's tone clipped closer to bone. Nathan chuckled, oblivious. "Come on, honey. Mom built that company from scratch back in the day." "Oh, sure," Lauren said sweetly, tilting her glass. "But that was, what, the 80s? We do things differently now." Eleanor's fingers brushed the rim of her wine glass. She had designed those company systems, quietly, deliberately, and every update since had passed through her silent authority. Yet here sat Lauren, laughing in a borrowed glow, too self-assured to imagine whose hands really kept the lights on. Patricia Green, seated 2 chairs away, caught Eleanor's eye across the table. Pat's expression said everything. "Don't bite yet." A moment later, Eleanor's phone buzzed against the tablecloth. One glance at the message. "Pat. Call Victor. Immediately." She didn't react. Instead, she tucked the phone beside her plate, her expression smooth as marble. Victor Lane, her attorney of 15 years, never appeared in conversation unless something required surgical precision. Across the lawn, fairy lights blinked to life as twilight softened the edges of the gathering. Guests mingled near the buffet. Nathan wandered toward the grill, oblivious as always. Lauren leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough for Eleanor to hear. "You know, I keep telling Nathan we should modernize your old departments. Maybe bring in someone who actually understands current markets. No offense." "None taken," Eleanor said evenly, her tone polite but carrying an undertow of iron. Lauren smiled like she'd won something. "Good. I just think it's time we make the company contemporary. Fresh leadership, you know?" Eleanor's lips curved faintly. Fresh leadership. The phrase rolled in her mind like an echo. Pat rose from her chair and touched Eleanor's shoulder lightly. "I'll get us some more iced tea," she murmured, but Eleanor caught the subtle pressure in her friend's hand, a silent signal. "Hold your ground. The stage is yours now, but don't perform yet." Eleanor watched her friend disappear into the house. Around her, the conversation flowed on, oblivious to the quiet tectonic shift beneath the table. She sat back, letting the hum of small talk wash over her. In her mind, the numbers lined up like an old symphony: LLC structures, trusts, shell holdings, the layers she'd built so meticulously that not even her son could see through them. The company Lauren bragged about helping run was nothing more than a sliver of a holding under Eleanor's full control. Her empire, her life's work, stood protected behind signatures and silent partners. Every document Victor had prepared, every clause Pat had urged her to reinforce, had been for moments exactly like this one. Lauren reached for another drink, her laughter growing louder as she held court. I swear, if I had control of the finance division, I'd double our profits in 6 months. Would you now? Eleanor asked softly, turning toward her. The question landed like a dropped coin. Small, but echoing. Lauren blinked, unsure whether she'd been challenged. I mean, it's not that complicated. Eleanor smiled again, the kind that never reached her eyes. You might be surprised how complicated ownership can be. Something in her tone chilled the laughter around the table. Nathan turned, uncertain. Mom, we're just joking around. I know, dear. Eleanor rose, placing her napkin neatly on her plate. Excuse me a moment. She stepped away from the patio, her heels clicking softly on the stone path that led toward the house. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. She reached for her phone, opened her contacts, and tapped Victor's name. When he answered, she said only, "It's time to prepare the documents for visibility." There was a pause, then his calm reply, "Understood, Mrs. Parker. Would you like me to notify Sophie as well?" "Yes," Eleanor said. Quietly. She ended the call and stood by the kitchen window, watching the laughter continue outside, the careless kind that always comes before a storm. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, steady and unreadable. The same face that built an empire brick by brick now hid behind soft silver hair and polite smiles. The empire they all thought they understood. Eleanor lifted her glass of water, took one slow sip, and whispered to herself, almost like a promise, "They'll see soon enough." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Eleanor Parker's study, glinting off glass picture frames and the faint silver thread in her hair. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the espresso machine downstairs, a rhythm as steady as her resolve. On her oak desk, a neat tower of binders waited. Each bore a discreet embossed label, holding structures, corporate rights, trust assignments. Every inch of that desk represented decades of patience, precision, and power so quietly held that even her own son had never seen it in full. Eleanor opened the top binder and traced a fingertip down the column of signatures. Her name appeared on every line that mattered: chairperson, trustee, sole beneficiary. Ellie Parker might have retired to the eyes of the public, but on paper, she remained the heart that pulsed behind every decision, every transaction, every profit surge Lauren so casually bragged about. Her phone buzzed. Victor Lane. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker," his steady voice came through. "Everything you requested last night has been confirmed. Corporate ownership remains solely in your name, the trust firewall is uncompromised, and your directives are legally irreversible." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. "Thank you, Victor." "And Lauren's access level?" "Limited to her division. She can't see or alter anything beyond her payroll and project budgets." "Good," Eleanor said. "Keep it that way." Quietly. She could almost hear Victor's approving nod through the line. Understood. After the call ended, she opened her laptop and typed a secure code that only she, Victor, and Sophie Kim knew. The dashboard appeared. Dozens of accounts, each layered under shell entities and trusts. Her empire, invisible but breathing, secure beneath 1,000 safeguards. Lauren's name appeared only once, in a shallow departmental file tagged Employee Records. Eleanor clicked it open. There was the younger woman's smiling headshot, her title, her modest salary. Lauren's pride came from thinking she sat at the helm of something she barely touched. Eleanor allowed herself a quiet chuckle. "Influence," she murmured. She believes she has influence. A soft chime signaled a new message. It was from Pat Green. Pat. You should document everything. The remarks, the tone. It'll be useful later. Eleanor typed back. Already started. I've learned from the best. Pat's reply came instantly. Good. Entitlement leaves a paper trail. Use it. Eleanor smiled, closing her laptop halfway. Pat had always known when to whisper strategy instead of comfort. The intercom on her desk blinked. Mrs. Parker? Came Sophie Kim's calm, efficient voice. Sophie had been with her since her first acquisition. I've completed the overnight verification on all financial and corporate accounts. Every transfer, lock, and signature authorization is under your control. Thank you, Sophie, Eleanor said. Has there been any unusual activity from Lauren's department? Only an attempted access to the corporate financials, Sophie said after a short pause. She doesn't have clearance. The system automatically blocked it. Eleanor's eyes cooled. Log it, quietly. Yes, ma'am. When the line clicked off, Eleanor rose and walked to the window. Outside, Atlanta shimmered under late-morning heat, glass towers rising in the distance, her empire reflected in steel and sunlight. No one out there would guess that the quiet woman in a linen blouse, standing in her own garden, controlled more of those towers than she'd ever admitted aloud. She thought of Lauren's laughter from the night before, the dismissive tone, the smirk, the word adorable. Eleanor let the memory sharpen her focus. Mockery was a form of blindness, and blindness made people sloppy. On her desk, the framed photo of Nathan as a child caught her eye. His smile, missing a front tooth, reminded her of the years she'd spent shielding him from the cold edges of business. Now, he was a grown man who couldn't see that his mother still ran the machine that paid for his comfort. She returned to her chair and pulled a leather-bound notebook toward her. On the first clean page, she wrote in her steady cursive, Phase 1. Establish observation. Confirm legal hold. Record patterns of arrogance. Wait for self-exposure. Her handwriting was elegant, controlled, like the mind behind it. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, a wind stirred the magnolia branches against the window pane. She flipped her phone over one more time, scanning Victor's confirmation message, Sophie's report, and Pat's counsel. Every ally was in place. Every lock was secure. All that remained was timing. Eleanor closed the binder with a quiet thud that echoed through the stillness of the room. She stood, straightened her shoulders, and looked once more toward the city skyline. They think they're running my company, she whispered. Let them believe it a little longer. Her reflection in the window smiled back, calm, unshakable, patient as ever. Because when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't be through anger or confrontation. It would be through revelation, clean, undeniable, and public. And when it came, Lauren Parker wouldn't just lose her illusion of control. She'd lose the story she'd built her entire pride on. By Friday evening, the house buzzed again. Different crowd. Same polished pretense. Lauren had insisted on hosting a casual dinner for Nathan's colleagues, but it felt more like a soft campaign rally. Laughter spilled from the open kitchen while Eleanor moved quietly among the guests, her calm presence almost invisible in the noise. Lauren stood at the center of it all, one hand on a wineglass, her other gesturing as she spoke. When I came on board, the company was, how do I say this, stuck in legacy systems. I had to push for change. Innovation doesn't happen by accident. Eleanor listened from the edge of the room, her expression placid, almost indulgent. The younger woman's voice carried easily across the polished hardwood floors. Lauren's confidence was real but misplaced, a borrowed crown worn too proudly. Nathan laughed along, adding nothing of substance but mirroring his wife's pride like a loyal echo. She's been amazing, he said, really taking on responsibility since Mom retired. Eleanor smiled faintly. Retired. Such a lovely fiction. She turned to refill her water, hiding the amused tilt of her lips behind the glass. Her mind catalogued each word, each claim, mental notations for the record she'd already begun to build. Pat arrived fashionably late, her entrance smooth as always. She caught Eleanor's gaze from across the room and made her way over, bypassing the crowd gathered around Lauren's self-congratulation. "I see the performance is well underway," Pat murmured, taking a canapé from the tray a server passed. "It's a masterclass in hubris," Eleanor replied softly. "She's rewritten history in under 10 minutes." Pat's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Record it. Mentally, at least. The more she talks, the easier the reveal." Eleanor nodded. "Timing is everything." From across the room, Lauren's laughter trilled again. "You wouldn't believe how outdated some of those contracts were," she said. "I had to tell accounting to run everything through me first." A few guests murmured approval. Eleanor could almost feel the heat of pride radiating from Lauren, bright, unchecked, careless. Victor Lane's name flashed briefly across Eleanor's phone screen. She stepped toward the hall, out of earshot, and opened the message. "Victor. All documents re-verified, ownership layers confirmed, everything untouchable." She typed back, "Perfect. Keep records sealed until further notice." The lawyer's reply came instantly. "Already done. This empire's bulletproof." Eleanor slid the phone back into her clutch and returned to the edge of the conversation. Her heart rate didn't change. Control wasn't a feeling. It was a fact. Lauren had migrated to the sofa now, surrounded by admiring faces. "Eleanor taught me so much," she was saying sweetly. "It's like I've carried on her legacy, only now with a modern touch." Eleanor's mouth twitched at the phrasing. "My legacy," she thought. "Carried on." Indeed. Pat leaned closer, her voice low. "She's building her own downfall one compliment at a time. Let her." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I intend to." The evening drifted on. Plates cleared. Conversations looping through familiar corporate chatter. Nathan drifted to Eleanor's side at last, looking mildly tipsy and comfortably ignorant. "You've got to be proud," he said, bumping her elbow gently. "Lauren's really stepping up." Eleanor turned to him, her tone kind but steady. "Pride, Nathan, comes from understanding what's truly being built, not just who's speaking about it." He frowned slightly, not catching the edge in her voice. "You're still watching over things, though, right?" "Just in case?" She smiled. "Always." Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from Sophie Kim. "Sophie. Lauren's department requested authorization for a vendor audit. It's been denied. Wrong clearance level." Eleanor's reply was a single line. "Good." Let her wonder why. Pat sipped her wine beside her. "You're positioning the pieces," she said. "She'll never see the move coming." Eleanor looked toward the laughing woman in the living room, the one basking in her illusion of power. "That's the point. When she finally looks down, she'll realize the ground isn't hers." Pat smiled, slow and knowing. "And when will you show her?" "When the audience is just big enough," Eleanor said. Lauren's laughter carried again, bright and empty. The guests around her nodded, impressed by stories they didn't realize were fiction. Nathan beamed, completely unaware of the fault line running between his wife's ego and his mother's silence. Eleanor set down her glass and let her gaze rest on the group one final time, imprinting the moment. Every word Lauren spoke tonight, every exaggerated claim and self-appointed title would make the reveal sharper, cleaner, undeniable. And when that reveal came, it wouldn't be anger they saw in Eleanor's eyes. It would be calm, precise justice. She turned toward Pat. "When the time comes," Eleanor murmured, I want Victor and Sophie ready to observe. Quietly. Pat nodded once. Understood. The laughter from the living room swelled again, shallow and loud. Eleanor's expression didn't change. She only whispered under her breath, almost like a vow. They think this business belongs to them. Soon, they'll see whose name it's written in. The Parker home gleamed under the warm glow of Saturday evening lights. The same people who had laughed in Lauren's orbit the night before now filled the living room again. Guests, colleagues, and board associates, all gathered for what Lauren had labeled a celebratory toast. Only Eleanor knew it would become something else entirely. She'd spent the morning with Victor on the phone, her tone calm, deliberate. Every clause, every ownership document had been confirmed and digitally time-stamped by noon. Sophie had verified that the accounts, trusts, and executive filings reflected her full control. Everything airtight, visible only when Eleanor chose to pull back the curtain. Now she stood by the large picture window, a glass of sparkling water in hand. Pat lingered beside her, quietly observant as ever. "Ready?" Pat asked, her voice low enough to be drowned out by the chatter around them. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Timing's right." Lauren's laughter rang out from the dining table. "You'll love this story," she was saying to a small circle of guests. "We're rolling out a new corporate image this quarter. I've been pushing for modern branding, something that feels more fresh. Honestly, it's high time we steer things in a new direction." Eleanor turned from the window. The phrase "we steer things" landed like an open invitation. She crossed the room, her presence commanding without effort. The hum of conversation softened as she reached the group. "That sounds promising," she said smoothly. "I wasn't aware we'd finalized that." Lauren blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, well, we haven't technically finalized it yet," she said quickly, her tone turning airy. "It's more of a proposal, something we'll discuss at the next review meeting." Eleanor's calm expression didn't waver. "Interesting, because according to the board filings this morning, there's no such initiative under review." A subtle ripple moved through the small circle of listeners. Lauren let out a light laugh. "You checked the filings?" "I like to stay informed," Eleanor said, her voice mild but razor-sharp beneath the warmth. "You know how it is when you own something. You take an interest in how it's run." The room went still. Someone's glass clinked quietly against the table. Nathan looked up from across the room, sensing the sudden quiet. "Mom?" Eleanor turned slightly, her tone gentle. "Yes, dear?" "What do you mean, own something?" Nathan asked, brow furrowing. Eleanor's eyes rested on him for a moment, soft, maternal, but carrying the weight of unspoken truth. "I mean, Nathan, that the company you and Lauren both work for, the one that funds these little soirees, is wholly under my control. Every share, every trust, every operating entity. Always has been." The silence deepened. Even the air conditioner's hum seemed to pause. Lauren stared at her, lips parted, color draining from her face. "That can't be right," she said, voice trembling around the edges. "Nathan and I, our names are on the filings. I've seen the quarterly reports." Victor Lane's calm baritone came from behind her. He had just stepped in through the side door, precisely as Eleanor had arranged. "You've seen public summaries, Mrs. Parker," he said respectfully. "But as your company's counsel, I can confirm Mrs. Eleanor Parker retains sole legal and financial ownership of the entire corporate entity." Eleanor inclined her head toward him in acknowledgement, her expression serene. Lauren's hands tightened around her glass. But that's impossible. I handle department budgets." "Budgets," Eleanor echoed softly, "not ownership. There's a difference." Pat watched quietly from the corner, her gaze flicking across the faces now frozen in dawning comprehension. The shift in the room was palpable. admiration giving way to curiosity, curiosity melting into unease. One guest whispered, "She owns the whole thing?" Another leaned in, murmuring, "All of it?" Eleanor smiled, gracious but immovable. "I've always believed in letting good people manage what they understand. It keeps things educational." Nathan stepped forward, confusion etched in every line of his face. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us?" Eleanor met his eyes, kind but unyielding. "Because you never asked. You were content to assume." The words hung there, quiet but devastating. Lauren opened her mouth again, but no sound came. Her confidence, the effortless charm, the entitlement, had evaporated. The crowd's attention no longer orbited her. It gravitated toward the woman who had been underestimated for years. Victor adjusted his cufflinks and spoke again, matter-of-factly. "All control measures, trust protections, and legal holdings are active and irrevocable. Mrs. Parker's authority is absolute." Pat raised her glass slightly, a silent salute that only Eleanor caught. The murmurs spread, a tide of awe and disbelief moving through the guests. Someone whispered Eleanor's name like it carried new gravity. The matriarch, the owner, the architect behind the empire. Lauren looked at her mother-in-law as if seeing her for the first time. How long have you?" Eleanor's answer came softly, perfectly measured. "Long enough to understand the value of silence." Lauren's throat bobbed as she swallowed. The humiliation was quiet but visible, a colorless flush creeping up her neck. Nathan stood beside her now, speechless. Eleanor glanced once toward Victor and Pat. Both nodded subtly. Every piece had moved as planned. Then, with the gentlest smile, Eleanor lifted her glass. "To legacy," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room, "and to those who mistake proximity for power." Glasses lifted hesitantly. The guests followed her lead, though no one quite met Lauren's eyes. Eleanor took a slow sip, then lowered her glass and turned slightly toward the window, the city lights shimmering behind her. Her reflection looked back, calm, untouchable. But inside her chest, something sharper stirred. Not anger, not triumph. Something deeper. A quiet satisfaction born of years of patience finally rewarded. Pat's voice reached her softly. "They'll never look at you the same way again." Eleanor didn't turn. "Good," she said. "I'm done being invisible." The air in the room had changed. The laughter that once flowed so easily now hovered uncertainly between breaths. Guests shifted in their seats, glasses half raised, glances darting toward Eleanor as though recalibrating their understanding of her. She didn't move quickly. She didn't need to. Authority didn't require motion. It required gravity. And Eleanor had that in abundance. Lauren still stood near the center of the room, her smile stretched thin, the wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. Her eyes searched the crowd for rescue. Some shared disbelief, some ally to echo her shock, but found only silence. She began, voice brittle. "I think there's some kind of misunderstanding. I mean, surely Nathan and I—" Eleanor turned her gaze toward her daughter-in-law, the faintest curve at the corner of her lips. "Lauren, dear," she said, her tone silk over steel. "If there were a misunderstanding, Victor would have corrected it." Victor Lane, still standing near the entryway, spoke with practiced calm. "There's no misunderstanding, Mrs. Parker," he said. "All ownership and controlling interest are documented, notarized, and legally permanent. There is no provision for transfer without Eleanor's explicit consent." The lawyer's words were like polished marble, smooth, cold, unbreakable. Lauren blinked rapidly, the denial flickering in her eyes. "But I manage the division. My name's on every internal report." Eleanor's voice cut gently across the protest. "Your work is appreciated," she said. But management and ownership are different currencies. You've been spending the wrong one. A few guests coughed into their drinks, trying to disguise amusement or disbelief. It was hard to tell which. Pat, watching from the corner of the room, caught Eleanor's eye and gave a small approving nod. Lauren's mouth opened again, but Eleanor's calm expression stopped her before the first word escaped. The older woman's stillness was more powerful than interruption. It was quiet command made visible. Nathan finally spoke. His tone was softer, not accusatory, just stunned. "Mom, why didn't you tell us any of this?" Eleanor looked at him, her gaze gentler now. "Because, Nathan, it was never hidden. You just didn't look." He rubbed the back of his neck, shame settling into his posture. His wife's sharp ambition had blinded him to the simple truth. His mother had never stepped away. She'd simply stepped back. Around them, the murmurs resumed, small and contained. Guests whispered not in gossip now, but in awe. One of them, Nathan's coworker from finance, muttered to another, "She's the real boss? All this time?" Eleanor caught the whisper but didn't acknowledge it. She didn't need their validation. She'd built this empire brick by brick, while men in suits once laughed her out of boardrooms. Lauren's voice came again, thinner, quieter. "Then what am I? Just an employee?" Eleanor's reply came so softly that everyone still heard it. "If you're uncertain, your paycheck should remind you." The blow landed silently. Lauren's hand tightened on her glass until the stem nearly cracked. Her gaze flicked to Nathan, who looked too stunned to move, and then to the lawyer, who avoided meeting her eyes entirely. Pat set her wineglass down with deliberate precision and stepped closer to Eleanor's side, not to interfere, but to bear witness. "It's remarkable, really," she said, her tone low and conversational. "How invisible strength can become until the light shifts just right." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Invisible by choice," she murmured. Lauren's shoulders stiffened. "You can't keep me out of major decisions," she said, voice trembling between fury and disbelief. "I have authority." Victor spoke before Eleanor had to. "Actually, Mrs. Parker, you don't. Your department functions at the discretion of the owner. That would be my client." Lauren turned pale. The truth hit her like cold air. Her influence, the meetings, the signatures, the projects she claimed to direct, was all contingent on Eleanor's quiet permission. She had been performing power, not wielding it. Her hand dropped to her side, the illusion cracking visibly. Nathan finally found his voice, his words halting. "Lauren, maybe we should—" But she stepped back, shaking her head, pride dissolving faster than she could hide it. Around her, the crowd watched with an uneasy blend of pity and fascination. Eleanor didn't gloat. She didn't have to. She simply turned toward Victor. "You said the protections are permanent?" "Yes, Mrs. Parker," Victor confirmed. "Every clause and contract has been locked. Even I can't alter them without your authorization." Eleanor nodded once, her voice serene. "Good. Then I think we can all rest easier knowing everything is exactly where it should be." Pat's gaze softened. She leaned closer and whispered, "You've drawn the line so elegantly they don't even realize it's bleeding." Eleanor's eyes flicked to her friend. "That's the art of it." Across the room, Lauren stood motionless, the realization crystallizing in her mind. Her job, her pride, her very sense of identity, all existed because Eleanor allowed it. Without that permission, she had nothing. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time since Eleanor had known her, Lauren Parker was silent. Eleanor lifted her glass again, her voice carrying just enough to reach the guests still lingering in stunned quiet. "Power doesn't need to shout," she said. "It only needs to be understood." The chandelier's light caught her glass as she raised it slightly, elegant, controlled, final. Pat smiled behind the rim of her wineglass. "You've just rewritten the hierarchy," she whispered. Eleanor's gaze stayed on Lauren as she replied, voice soft as velvet. "No," she said. "I simply reminded them who wrote it in the first place." By Monday morning, the echo of Saturday's revelation still lingered like smoke. The Parker estate was quiet, save for the faint hum of the espresso machine and the muted clink of porcelain from the kitchen. Eleanor sat at her breakfast nook, the Atlanta skyline hazy beyond the garden's edge, her laptop open to a secure dashboard of numbers, her empire distilled into balance sheets and ledgers. Every account was steady, every investment alive, every transfer traceable to her signature alone. A soft chime announced an incoming video call. Sophie Kim appeared on the screen. Neat bun, sharp suit, eyes clear and precise. "Morning, Mrs. Epke Parker," Sophie said, her voice crisp but respectful. "Just finished verifying the corporate accounts. The ownership structures are intact. All signatory authority remains in your name only." "Any irregularities?" Eleanor asked. "One attempted access from the departmental network," Sophie replied, "originating from Lauren Parker's office." Eleanor didn't even blink. "Was she successful?" "No, ma'am," Sophie said, her expression unreadable. "The system blocked it immediately. She tried to pull executive summaries, but her clearance doesn't extend beyond her own division. I flagged it for legal notation." "Good," Eleanor said, stirring her tea. "Keep monitoring quietly. I want every attempt logged. Let her tug at the threads a little." Sophie's lips twitched, the faintest trace of amusement. "Of course. Victor already confirmed all fiduciary locks are permanent. Not even board intervention could alter them without your biometric verification." Eleanor leaned back, her tone serene. "Perfect." As the call ended, she caught her reflection in the black screen, a woman calm, composed, untouchable. The kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from mastery. Downstairs, footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Nathan's voice carried softly up the stairs. "Mom, are you in your office?" She closed the laptop and turned as he stepped in, looking uneasy, still bruised from the weekend's revelations. His tie was crooked, his confidence shaken. "I wanted to check on you," he began, settling awkwardly into the chair across from her. "Things got tense Saturday." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Tense moments reveal honest people, Nathan." He sighed, glancing toward the window. "Lauren's been quiet since then. She keeps saying she'll fix it, that she just needs to show everyone her value." Eleanor's eyes softened, but her tone didn't bend. Her value doesn't come from volume, it comes from contribution, and right now, her contributions are mostly noise. Nathan flinched slightly but didn't disagree. "She tried to access some company accounts this morning," he admitted. "Said she was checking on budgets." "Budgets don't require top-level access," Eleanor said, her voice cool but factual. "She's learning the difference between influence and permission." Nathan looked down, twisting his wedding band. "I should have realized sooner how much you still did for the company. I just assumed you'd stepped back." "You assumed," Eleanor repeated gently, and she counted on that assumption. "But that's all right. You're learning." Before he could answer, Eleanor's phone buzzed, a new message from Victor Lane. She opened it while Nathan watched. "Victor, all corporate protections reaffirmed this morning. Trusts and assets remain under your exclusive control. No vulnerabilities detected. Shall I forward the verification to Sophie?" Eleanor typed back, "Yes. Keep records sealed, quietly." She looked up at Nathan, her expression calm. "Everything is secure." He nodded slowly. "You don't even seem angry." Eleanor's smile returned, measured, knowing. "Anger is for people who lose control. I haven't lost anything." He exhaled, almost in relief. Maybe you should talk to Lauren. She's embarrassed, Mom. Really embarrassed. Eleanor rose, crossing to the window, her silhouette framed by sunlight. Embarrassment is a fine teacher, she said. Let her sit in class a while longer. Pat arrived moments later, unannounced as always, a stack of legal folders tucked under her arm. I just came from Victor's office, she said, setting the papers on the counter. He's impressed. Says your corporate armor could survive a nuclear strike. Eleanor chuckled softly. That was the goal. Pat leaned against the counter, watching her friend. She tried, didn't she? Eleanor met her eyes. She did. She reached for a door that was never hers to open. Pat smiled faintly. And found it locked. With her own reflection in the handle, Eleanor said. They shared a quiet, knowing laugh. The sound was low, confident, almost tender, like two generals reviewing the field after victory. Downstairs, the sound of a door closing echoed faintly, Lauren leaving for the office, punctual and pale. Eleanor didn't need to see her face to know what it looked like, a mask stitched together with pride and denial. Pat glanced toward the sound. How long before she realizes it's over? Eleanor returned to her seat, her eyes calm. It's not over, she said softly. It's just begun. She hasn't tried to challenge the board yet. Pat's eyebrows lifted. She'll try? Oh, she'll try, Eleanor said, pouring another cup of tea. And when she does, the board will call me, because they always do, and she'll finally understand the weight of what she doesn't control. Outside, the morning light burned through the haze, casting sharp lines across Eleanor's desk. She took a slow sip, savoring the warmth, the quiet, the absolute security of it all. People like Lauren, she said at last, setting her cup down, believe control is taken, but it isn't. It's given, and I stopped giving a long time ago. Pat nodded, a small smile curving her lips. Then she's about to learn that lesson the hard way. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the city beyond the window, her empire glinting in glass and steel. Exactly as intended. By the following weekend, word of Eleanor Parker's revelation had woven its way through the family's social circle like fine perfume, quietly, but impossible to ignore. At a small brunch hosted at Nathan and Lauren's home, the polite chatter of friends and extended family carried an undercurrent of curiosity. Every glance toward Eleanor lingered a fraction too long. Every compliment came laced with subtle awe. Eleanor noticed, of course. She always did. But she accepted each comment with her usual measured grace, smiling without pretense, responding without flourish. She didn't need the room's validation. She already owned the foundation beneath their admiration. Lauren, however, was unraveling behind the polite veneer. She poured mimosas with just a little too much vigor, the citrus spilling over the rim of one glass before she caught herself. Her laugh came a beat too late, her tone a shade too brittle. To everyone else, she looked composed. To Eleanor, she looked like a mask cracking under heat. So, Eleanor, said one of Nathan's colleagues, his tone careful but curious, I heard you've been more involved with the company lately. Must be exciting to see it thrive again. Eleanor set her teacup down, her movement unhurried. Exciting, yes, she said. Though I've always found it more satisfying to ensure a business endures, rather than merely thrives. Endurance takes planning. Thriving is often just timing. A ripple of laughter moved through the table, respectful, not mocking. Lauren's jaw tightened as she forced a smile. Nathan shifted in his chair, tugging at his collar. Mom's always had a steady hand, he offered, his voice awkwardly cheerful. She's been keeping things running behind the scenes for years. Decades, Pat corrected from across the table, her tone light but pointed. Some of us just never realized how much of the stage she built before the rest of us stepped on it. Eleanor hid a small smile behind her napkin. Lauren's fork paused mid-air. It's been a transition, she said carefully. I think we all just misunderstood roles. Pat arched an eyebrow. Some roles are appointed, dear. Others are earned. The silence that followed wasn't harsh. It was delicate, like fine glass placed on the edge of a table. Victor Lane, seated at the far end, cleared his throat softly. He had attended at Eleanor's quiet invitation, ostensibly as a friend, but his mere presence lent the gathering a subtle weight. "If I may," he said, voice smooth as polished stone, "Mrs. Parker's oversight ensures that the company's legal integrity remains absolute. Stability like that benefits everyone involved." Lauren's eyes flicked to him, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. "Of course," she said tightly. "No one doubts that." Eleanor's gaze drifted toward Nathan, who sat staring down at his plate, the realization still fresh and raw in his posture. She knew what was happening in his mind, years of assumptions folding in on themselves, guilt mingling with awe. Finally, he looked up at her. "Mom," he said quietly, "I really didn't give you enough credit. I thought you wanted to step back. But you were still steering the whole time." Eleanor's expression softened, though her tone stayed level. "Stepping back, Nathan, doesn't mean surrendering the wheel. It means letting people believe they're steering, long enough to see where they'll drive." Lauren's hand twitched against her glass. "That's a very clever way to put it," she said with brittle sweetness. "Almost like a test." Eleanor turned to her, meeting her gaze with calm precision. "No test, dear. Just observation. People always show you what they value most: control, credit, or contribution. It's never hard to tell which is which." Pat's smile was small, approving. "Beautifully said." The table resumed conversation in polite, measured tones, but beneath the surface an electric shift was underway. Guests who once treated Lauren as the voice of the family company now deferred to Eleanor instinctively, asking for her insights, listening when she spoke, adjusting their posture when she nodded. Lauren noticed every one of those shifts. Each question directed to Eleanor instead of her was another small cut. Her confidence, once effortless, now came in forced gestures. Victor leaned slightly toward Eleanor. "Everything remains secure," he said quietly, meant only for her. "Accounts, documentation, trusts, still ironclad. Even the attempted board inquiry has been neutralized." Eleanor inclined her head. "Thank you, Victor." Pat's voice drifted softly beside her. "She'll try to recover. They always do." "I expect her to," Eleanor replied, "but recovery without power is just noise." Lauren excused herself from the table, her smile practiced, her exit polite. The room watched her go, murmurs resuming like the low hum of bees. Nathan stared after his wife, a mix of sympathy and dawning comprehension in his eyes. "She's struggling," he said quietly. "She's recalibrating," Eleanor corrected. "It takes time to learn where you actually stand." Pat looked at her friend, her eyes gleaming with quiet admiration. "And where you stand?" Eleanor reached for her tea, her hand steady as ever. "Exactly where I've always been." As the brunch continued, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting Eleanor in warm gold. Around her, conversations ebbed and flowed, but the dynamic had shifted entirely. She no longer occupied the edges of her family's story. She was the center. And from the kitchen doorway, Lauren paused just long enough to see it, to watch every guest's body language orbit around the matriarch she'd once mocked. The realization flickered across her face like a storm cloud. She stepped out of sight, her heels clicking down the hallway, her silence heavy with calculation. Eleanor set her cup down, her expression untroubled. "Pat," she murmured, "make sure Victor keeps copies of everything." Pat smiled. "Already done." Eleanor exhaled softly, her gaze drifting toward the doorway where Lauren had vanished. "She's not finished," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "But neither am I." By Tuesday morning, the company's executive floor hummed with a subtle tension. Conversation stopped when Eleanor Parker passed through the glass corridors, respect wrapped in surprise. She hadn't set foot inside the building in nearly 2 years, and yet everyone seemed to instinctively know that the hierarchy had shifted. Her heels clicked with quiet rhythm as she moved toward the boardroom, where a small gathering awaited. Victor Lane, Pat Green, and, uninvited but present, Lauren and Nathan. Lauren had arrived early, hoping to regain footing. She stood near the window, phone in hand, whispering instructions to someone on the other end. The moment Eleanor entered, her voice faltered. "Mom," Nathan said, straightening quickly, his tone a mixture of respect and residual guilt. "We didn't expect you at this week's meeting." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I know." She placed her leather folder on the table, its weight symbolic. "That's why I'm here." Pat leaned casually against the far wall, watching the exchange with the expression of someone who already knew the ending. Lauren cleared her throat, forcing composure. "We were just discussing new marketing initiatives. I've been coordinating with the team to finalize approvals." Eleanor took her seat at the head of the table. Her seat, not borrowed or symbolic, but legal and permanent. She opened the folder with unhurried precision. "Then this will save everyone some time." From within, she drew a series of neatly clipped documents and laid them before Victor. "Updated directives, effective immediately." Victor scanned the pages, nodded once, and addressed the room. "As of this morning, Mrs. Parker has reinstated her executive oversight. All departmental reporting will now flow directly through her office. Budgetary approvals, corporate communication, and board correspondence. Centralized." Lauren's face paled. "That's unnecessary," she said quickly. "I already managed that process." Victor didn't look at her. Not anymore. Eleanor's tone remained soft, her expression unreadable. "Efficiency, dear. The company's grown too complex for fragmented leadership." Nathan shifted uneasily in his seat. "So you're taking back full control?" "I'm resuming what was never relinquished," she replied simply. "You'll still have roles, both of you, just clearly defined ones." Lauren's jaw tightened. Defined by whom? Eleanor met her eyes, calm and unwavering. "By the person who owns the company." The silence that followed was crystalline. Even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Pat exhaled slowly, her lips curving into the faintest trace of approval. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Lauren looked toward Victor as if searching for some legal loophole. "There has to be a review process. The board—" Victor interrupted, polite but final. "The board is advisory. Ownership decisions fall solely under Mrs. Parker's authority. And for clarity, those protections are permanent." "Permanent?" Nathan echoed, his voice quiet, almost disbelieving. "Yes," Victor said, sliding one of the documents toward them. "No transfers, no proxies, no override clauses. Mrs. Parker's position cannot be altered without her direct written consent." Lauren stared down at the page, her reflection faintly visible in the glossy surface. "You've locked everything." Eleanor folded her hands neatly. "Of course. I built this company to last beyond sentiment or convenience." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, visibly humbled. "I never realized how much you still handled." Eleanor's tone softened slightly. "That was intentional. Some lessons are best learned by absence." From her quiet corner, Pat finally spoke. "You've taught them that control isn't a right, it's a responsibility earned and easily revoked when abused." Eleanor smiled faintly. "They'll remember that." Across the table, Lauren stared at the documents, her eyes flicking over the lines of authority that excluded her entirely. Her breathing quickened, though she tried to mask it. "So what now?" she asked, her voice low. "You'll just dictate everything from your study while the rest of us pretend to be useful?" Eleanor rose, gathering her folder with deliberate calm. "I don't dictate," she said. "I direct." The distinction landed with the weight of truth. Pat stepped forward, collecting her own notes. "You've handled this beautifully, Eleanor." Quiet moves, sharp edges. Very few people could have pulled it off without noise. Eleanor glanced at her friend, a hint of warmth breaking through her composure. "Patience, my dear. Always patience. That's what makes strategy look like grace." Nathan stood as his mother passed. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't understand before, but I do now. You didn't build a business. You built a fortress." Eleanor paused in the doorway, turning just enough for her voice to reach them all. "A fortress protects," she said, "and teaches everyone outside its walls what happens when they mistake open gates for ownership." As she left the boardroom, conversation resumed in hushed tones. The executives who had once looked to Lauren for direction now avoided her gaze entirely. Pat lingered behind just long enough to watch Lauren sink back into her chair, hands trembling slightly over the papers she could no longer control. Outside, sunlight streamed through the tall lobby windows, catching Eleanor's reflection in the glass. Steady, composed, quietly victorious. She adjusted her jacket, her lips curving just slightly as she whispered to herself, "They're finally seeing what control really looks like." By Thursday, the ripples had turned into quiet waves. Word of Eleanor Parker's return to the helm wasn't shouted from rooftops. It didn't need to be. It slipped through Atlanta's professional circles with the same precision Eleanor used in every part of her life. Whispered in elevators, mentioned at charity lunches, repeated at board dinners where people glanced over their shoulders before speaking her name. "She's back," one executive murmured. "She never left," came the knowing reply. At the company's headquarters, the energy had shifted entirely. Staff who once deferred to Lauren now greeted Eleanor with respect that bordered on reverence. She didn't command attention. It followed her naturally, the way sunlight found glass. Lauren noticed. She stood outside her office that morning, watching as employees she once managed crossed the hall to greet Eleanor instead. They smiled genuinely. No forced politeness, no obligation. And when Eleanor spoke, they listened, not out of fear, but admiration. Nathan trailed a few steps behind, uncomfortable, uncertain. He looked at his mother differently now, not as the polite, aging matriarch he'd half forgotten in her quiet retirement, but as the force that had shaped everything he'd inherited. Inside the conference room, Victor Lane handed Eleanor a slim folder. "Final verification," he said. "All corporate and financial protections remain intact. Every ownership clause, every signatory control, unassailable. Lauren's recent correspondence to the board has been filed and dismissed." Eleanor nodded once, serene. "Thank you, Victor. You've been invaluable through this." Lauren bristled from her seat at the far end of the table. "You didn't need to file anything against me. I was only trying to clarify the board's communication chain." Victor's tone was steady but unyielding. "Mrs. Parker, the board communicates directly with the owner. There's nothing to clarify." The sentence was so calm, so matter-of-fact, that it didn't even sound cruel. But it left Lauren visibly smaller, her face tightening around a restrained smile. Pat, who had slipped into the room moments earlier, leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "I do love when things clarify themselves, don't you?" she said lightly, her amusement sharp but elegant. Eleanor allowed herself the faintest smile. It's amazing what clarity can do. Nathan tried to diffuse the tension with a nervous laugh. "Mom, you've really turned things around." Eleanor looked at him, not unkindly. "No, Nathan, I've simply reminded everyone what was already true." Pat's gaze flicked toward the window. Below, in the courtyard, employees gathered in small clusters. Eleanor's name floated through the air in quiet conversations. She could almost hear it. Admiring, curious, reverent. The matriarch who'd quietly owned the company all along. And then came the twist Eleanor hadn't engineered, but had certainly earned. It began when Southern Commerce Weekly, one of Atlanta's most read business magazines, called Victor's office requesting comment. A feature piece, they said, on the return of Eleanor Parker and the quiet brilliance of legacy leadership. When Victor relayed the request, Pat's eyes glimmered with amusement. You didn't even need to lift a finger. They came to you. Eleanor chuckled softly. Timing, Pat. Let people connect the dots on their own, and they'll draw something far more flattering than you ever could. Lauren's face drained of color. You're going to let them print that? About you taking over again? I'm not taking over, dear, Eleanor said, her tone like velvet stretched over steel. I'm simply being recognized for what's mine. Lauren looked toward Nathan, but he avoided her gaze. He'd begun to understand something that she hadn't. Eleanor didn't just win battles, she rewrote the map afterward. Later that afternoon, the main lobby filled with soft conversation as the magazine's photographer arrived unexpectedly to take preliminary shots of the headquarters. Staff straightened their ties and stood a little taller as Eleanor walked through, her presence steady and composed. The photographer paused, gesturing toward the large window overlooking the skyline. Would you mind standing there, Mrs. Parker? The light suits you. Eleanor smiled, amused. Of course. As the camera clicked, Lauren lingered near the reception desk, unseen by most, her expression hollow. Every flash of the camera was a quiet erasure of her imagined importance. Pat joined Eleanor afterward, placing a gentle hand on her arm. You know, she said, some people spend their lives trying to earn this kind of recognition. You just waited. Eleanor looked toward the lobby's reflection, her figure framed by glass and light. Calm, assured. Waiting, she said softly, isn't patience, it's preparation. Pat laughed quietly. You make it sound poetic. It is, Eleanor replied. Strategy always is. As they walked toward the exit, whispers trailed behind them like wind. Eleanor Parker, someone murmured. She's the one who built it all. And somewhere in that crowd, Lauren turned away, her pride fractured but not extinguished. Her silence was no longer humiliation. It was calculation, the kind that smoldered in the dark. Pat noticed. She's still thinking, she murmured. I know, Eleanor said without turning back. That's what makes the next move inevitable. She paused by the elevator, the city lights flickering behind her reflection. The click of the closing doors echoed like a seal on a new era. The weekend air over Atlanta was warm and quiet, the kind of calm that settled only after a storm had done its work. In her sunlit study, Eleanor Parker sat near the tall windows, the soft hum of classical music blending with the rustle of magnolia leaves outside. A porcelain cup of Earl Grey steamed gently beside her. The empire she'd built, her company, her holdings, her legacy, was finally silent again. No scrambling phone calls, no strained smiles from Lauren, no anxious questions from Nathan. For the first time in months, her world was orderly, predictable, whole. Sophie Kim's email had arrived that morning. All accounts confirmed. No unauthorized access detected. Attached was Victor's verification packet. Concise as always. Corporate and legal filings remain in perfect standing. All protections active, irrevocable, and compliant. Eleanor skimmed the documents, not because she doubted them, but because she liked the sound of permanence, the kind that came from foresight and restraint, not dominance, but design. Pat's voice arrived before she did, the familiar cadence floating from the hall. I come bearing pastries and gossip, she announced lightly, pushing open the study door with her shoulder. Eleanor looked up, amused. In that order? Always. Pat set the small bakery box on the coffee table and poured herself tea from the second cup Eleanor had already prepared. Of course she had known she would come. They sat in the quiet companionship of people who had survived long enough to understand that peace was never free. It was earned, preserved, defended. Pat bit into her croissant, watching her friend over the rim of her teacup. The magazine piece dropped this morning. The title's almost flattering. The Woman Behind the Curtain. Eleanor Parker's Empire of Quiet Power. You're trending among people who still use landlines. Eleanor smiled faintly. I always preferred audiences that read slowly. Pat chuckled, shaking her head. Lauren must be fuming. Lauren is learning, Eleanor corrected softly. Fuming comes first. Understanding comes later. Pat leaned back. And Nathan? He called, Eleanor said, glancing toward her phone on the desk. Twice, actually. I let it ring. He'll stop calling when he realizes there's nothing left to fix. Pat's eyes softened. You're still his mother. And he's still my son, Eleanor replied. But that doesn't make him my equal. Outside, sunlight spilled through the sheer curtains, the city's high-rises shimmering in reflection. Somewhere downtown, Lauren was likely pacing her office, trying to craft an apology that sounded like strategy. Eleanor didn't resent her for it. Ambition, after all, was a useful teacher. Her gaze returned to the screen, where Victor's digital signature gleamed on the final page. All protections are permanent. She thought of those words like a final chord in a symphony she'd spent a lifetime composing. Victor called later that afternoon. His voice, as always, was calm. Everything is stable, Mrs. Parker. You're in the clear for at least another decade, barring any legal innovation I can't foresee. Then we'll plan for 2, Eleanor said lightly. He laughed under his breath. You know, most people would celebrate. I am celebrating, she said. I'm doing it quietly, the way all lasting victories should be enjoyed. When the call ended, Eleanor closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, the silver of her hair catching the afternoon light, her eyes sharper than time should allow. Pat refilled both teacups and said softly, You could retire for real now, you know. Walk away. Spend the rest of your life just being comfortable. Eleanor smiled. Comfort has never interested me. She reached for a notepad on her desk, its first line already written in neat cursive. Next phase, philanthropic allocation. Pat raised an eyebrow. You're giving it away? Not giving, Eleanor corrected. Redirecting. Power only stays clean if it moves. Pat nodded approvingly. You're remarkable. Eleanor looked out the window again, her tone calm but weighted. Remarkable is just what people call a woman when she does what they didn't think she could. The 2 women sat in easy silence as the afternoon light turned golden. From somewhere outside, a neighbor's wind chime tinkled faintly. The air carried a rare, quiet satisfaction, the kind that doesn't need applause to confirm it exists. But as the light began to fade, Eleanor's phone buzzed again. A single message illuminated the screen. Unknown number. Congratulations, Mrs. Parker. Impressive feature. I look forward to meeting soon about your company's charitable initiatives. The name attached below made her pause. A regional development director, a man whose reputation for acquiring small companies under the guise of philanthropic partnerships was well known to her. Eleanor's serene expression didn't falter, but a faint spark lit behind her eyes. Pat noticed immediately. What is it? Eleanor smiled, folding the phone shut like a secret. Nothing urgent, just another opportunity presenting itself. Pat grinned. Opportunity or warning? Eleanor took another sip of tea, unhurried, unbothered. Sometimes, she said, They're the same thing. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, just enough to stir the still air. Eleanor set her cup down and looked toward the horizon where the first hint of a storm bruised the sky. Her voice was soft, almost amused. Peace never lasts forever. But it lasts long enough to plan the next move. Monday morning broke with the calm of inevitability. The rain from the night before had left the streets slick and reflective, mirroring the city skyline like two versions of the same truth. One visible, one beneath the surface. Eleanor Parker preferred the latter. She sat at the head of the long conference table, her presence commanding but not loud. Around her, the boardroom buzzed with the small, cautious sounds of people waiting to speak in front of someone who'd taught them silence was a virtue. Nathan sat 2 chairs down, hands clasped, posture stiff. Across from him, Lauren avoided his gaze, her phone turned face down beside her, as if the screen itself had turned against her. Victor Lane stood near the window, reviewing a folder in his measured, unhurried way. His voice broke the quiet first. "Mrs. Parker, the legal review is complete. All filings, trusts, and protective measures remain airtight. Nothing and no one can challenge your authority without your consent." Eleanor nodded once. "That's reassuring, Victor, though I never doubted it." Pat, seated near the far end, smiled faintly and sipped her coffee. "Doubt is for people who rely on luck. Eleanor prefers law." A few polite chuckles rippled through the room, but none from Lauren. Eleanor folded her hands, her tone even. "Let's move to the next order of business, our philanthropic division." Lauren perked slightly, grasping for footing. "I was hoping to discuss that, actually. The director from Southern Development reached out last week about—" Eleanor interrupted, softly but decisively. "Yes, I'm aware. He reached out to me." Lauren froze. He did?" Eleanor turned to Victor. "You've reviewed his background?" Victor nodded. "Predatory. He's dressed his acquisitions as partnerships for years. We've already declined the meeting and documented the refusal." "Perfect," Eleanor said. "Then there's nothing left to discuss." Lauren exhaled quietly, her expression trying to recover its composure. Nathan glanced at her, then at his mother. "Mom?" he began carefully. She was just trying to contribute. Eleanor met his gaze, steady and patient. "Contribution requires understanding, Nathan. Otherwise it's just noise made to feel useful." He looked down at the table, chastened. "I know." Pat's lips curved slightly. It's strange how people confuse access with authority. One opens a door. The other builds the house. Eleanor gave her a small nod of agreement before turning back to the group. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice smooth, but cutting through the room like fine glass. "This company will engage in charity, but not for image or convenience. We'll choose causes that build endurance, not applause." Victor adjusted his glasses. "I've drawn up initial allocations based on that principle, each one structured to maintain your control and oversight." "Good," Eleanor said. "Let's finalize them this week." From across the table, Lauren's composure slipped. "You're locking me out of those decisions too?" Eleanor turned toward her fully, calm but unflinching. "Lauren, I'm protecting what you mistook for yours. That isn't exclusion, it's correction." The words landed cleanly without venom. Pat watched the exchange, her expression unreadable, but her eyes gleaming. "And what a rare thing, correction," she murmured, half to herself. Eleanor continued without pause. "Entitlement is easy," she said, her tone almost reflective. "It's assuming ownership without effort, credit without cost. But entitlement collapses the moment truth enters the room." Lauren's throat tightened, but she didn't respond. Nathan reached for her hand under the table. She didn't take it. Victor closed his folder, breaking the tension with practiced ease. On a technical note, he said, all these structures will continue indefinitely, Mrs. Parker, even after your lifetime. Eleanor looked up at him. As intended. Legacy, Pat said softly. Eleanor smiled. Control is temporary. Legacy isn't. The meeting adjourned quietly. Board members filed out, some exchanging polite smiles, others whispering low admiration for the woman who'd turned silence into strategy. When the room emptied, only Eleanor, Pat, and the faint ticking of the clock remained. Pat leaned back in her chair, a quiet laugh escaping her. You know, you could have retired a decade ago. Most people would have. Eleanor glanced toward the window, where sunlight broke through the retreating clouds. Most people build comfort, she said. I built continuity. Pat's eyes softened. And them? She tilted her chin toward the empty chairs where Nathan and Lauren had sat. Do you think they've learned? Eleanor smiled, slow and deliberate. Not yet. But lessons don't need to be learned quickly, just remembered permanently. Outside, the afternoon sun struck the glass towers of her city, casting reflections like gold across the skyline. It looked peaceful, but she knew better. Peace was only the pause between moves. Her phone buzzed once on the table. A new message. She opened it without hurry. Unknown number. Congratulations on the Southern Commerce feature. My partners are interested in a private offer. You may find the terms persuasive. Eleanor's smile deepened, not of delight, but anticipation. She turned the phone toward Pat, who raised an eyebrow. Opportunity? Pat asked. Another test, Eleanor said, setting it down beside her tea. Apparently, some people still haven't learned. Her gaze lingered on the city outside, her empire, her fortress, her proving ground. Then, quietly, she said, Good. It keeps me sharp. The invitation arrived on thick ivory cardstock, simple, elegant, unmistakably deliberate. The Parker Foundation Gala, an evening of renewal. By the following Friday, Atlanta's corporate and philanthropic circles were abuzz with speculation. Eleanor Parker hadn't hosted an event in years. Whispers traveled through downtown high-rises and country club dining rooms alike. What is she planning? Lauren certainly wanted to know. She sat at her vanity that evening, silver earrings trembling in her hands as she fastened them. Nathan watched her from the doorway, uncertain whether to speak. She's up to something, Lauren said, her voice low but sharp. You don't just announce a foundation and invite half the city overnight. Nathan hesitated. Maybe she's just being generous. Lauren turned toward him, eyes narrowing. Eleanor Parker doesn't do just. Everything she does has a purpose. He had no answer. The ballroom at the Four Seasons shimmered in soft gold light. Tables were dressed in cream and slate, accented with crystal centerpieces shaped like magnolia blossoms. The air carried the faint hum of strings and low conversation, the sound of money learning to behave itself. Eleanor stood near the center, poised and composed, wearing a charcoal silk gown that caught the light with every movement. Pat was beside her, elegant as ever, quietly scanning the room like a general assessing the field. Victor Lane approached, carrying a discreet leather portfolio. Everything is finalized, he murmured. The trust is registered under the new philanthropic umbrella. The funds are ring-fenced, irrevocable. No board intervention possible. Eleanor inclined her head. Perfect. Thank you, Victor. Lauren and Nathan arrived a few minutes later. Lauren's smile was polished, her tone carefully neutral. You've certainly gathered everyone who matters tonight. Eleanor turned to her with a serene expression. I always do. Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but the announcer's voice carried through the speakers, calling for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your eyes to the stage, Mrs. Eleanor Parker would like to make a brief address. The applause was immediate and polite. Eleanor ascended the small dais with measured grace, her steps unhurried. The room quieted almost instantly. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear, unforced. "For years, this company, and by extension my family, has benefited from the kind of success that only time, discipline, and a little bit of faith can produce. Tonight, we begin the next chapter of that success, one that returns what we've been fortunate enough to keep." Lauren's expression shifted, wary. Eleanor continued, "I've established the Parker Foundation, a perpetual trust that will allocate 15% of annual corporate profits to initiatives supporting small businesses led by women and veterans across Georgia. The structure is permanent and legally protected, no amendments, no reversals." A murmur moved through the crowd, admiration, surprise, awe. Victor, from his place at the edge of the room, nodded once to confirm every word. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward Lauren briefly, her tone softening just slightly. "This isn't charity for spectacle. It's responsibility, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already working." Applause swelled again, this time genuine. Guests rose from their seats, clinking glasses and offering congratulations. Lauren clapped too, but her smile faltered under the weight of understanding. 15%, she murmured under her breath. "That's permanent?" Victor's smooth voice answered from behind her. "It is." Mrs. Parker insisted on a clause that locks it indefinitely. Not even a future board majority can alter it. Lauren turned toward him sharply. "And she didn't think to consult us?" Victor's tone didn't change. "She didn't need to." Pat approached Eleanor as the music swelled again, her expression glowing with quiet pride. "You've disarmed them without raising your voice," she said softly. "You've turned control into grace." Eleanor smiled, the faintest touch of irony in her voice. "Grace is just strategy with better lighting." They shared a brief laugh before a cluster of guests approached. Executives, donors, family friends, all eager to shake Eleanor's hand, to tell her how visionary she was, how selfless this decision seemed. She accepted their compliments with polite humility, her eyes calm but unreadable. From across the room, Nathan watched his mother surrounded by admiration, the glow of applause washing over her like light through glass. He turned to his wife. "She really did it," he said softly. "She gave away what we thought we controlled." Lauren's answer came quietly, through clenched teeth. "She gave it away to keep it." Eleanor's gaze caught them briefly from across the room. She lifted her glass slightly, an acknowledgement, not a toast. The gesture carried both warmth and finality. Pat leaned in close, her voice low. "They finally see it, you know. The difference between generosity and power." Eleanor's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "I know. That's why I chose tonight." Outside, beyond the ballroom's high windows, the rain began again. Soft, steady, cleansing. The music swelled and the crowd's admiration grew, rippling like waves. Eleanor stood in the center of it all, composed as ever, the architect of her own mythology. She thought briefly of the message from the unknown number, of the promised private offer waiting for her response. A new storm on the horizon, perhaps. But for now, she let it wait. Pat touched her arm lightly. "You look almost peaceful." Eleanor's gaze drifted to the glittering skyline beyond the glass. "That's the trick, Pat," she said quietly. "Peace is just the pause before your next move." By the end of spring, the city of Atlanta seemed to hum with Eleanor Parker's name. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but with that quiet, reverent tone people reserve for those who've proven themselves in ways no one can dispute. Her portrait now hung in the main hall of Parker Holdings, an unspoken testament to the shift in power. The younger employees, those who had only ever known Lauren as the face of the brand, walked by it daily, murmuring small things. "She built this. She's the reason the company's still stable. That's what real leadership looks like. Eleanor never commented on the portrait, of course. She didn't have to. In the weeks following the Foundation Gala, her company's reputation had only strengthened. Profits rose, turnover dropped, and the press framed the Parker brand as reformed through integrity. Internally, staff meetings were smoother, calmer. The air of uncertainty that had lingered under Lauren's tenure had vanished. Lauren noticed every shift, every silence that no longer waited for her to fill it. Her calendar was emptier now. No new approvals required, no strategies to present. Victor had restructured communication chains so that all decisions flowed through Eleanor's office. And though Nathan still held his title, it was clear his role was one of presence, not power. That morning, as sunlight streamed through the glass atrium of the corporate headquarters, Eleanor and Pat walked side by side toward the executive floor. Pat was reading a folded newspaper, smirking slightly. "Page 3, she said, handing it over. "You've become everyone's favorite case study." Eleanor took it, scanning the headline. "The Parker Blueprint: How Quiet Leadership Outlasts Arrogance." She smiled faintly. Flattering. Almost accurate. "Almost?" Pat teased. "I wouldn't call it quiet leadership," Eleanor said. "Just long memory." Pat laughed. "Whatever it is, it's working." As they entered the boardroom, Victor was already there, a folder open in front of him. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker. I wanted to update you on the filings." Eleanor nodded, taking her seat. "All corporate protections remain intact," Victor continued. "The Foundation's assets are isolated from any operational shifts, and your trust remains the final signatory authority on all Parker Holdings transactions. No one, not even the board, can override your directives." Eleanor folded her hands. "Excellent." From the corner of the room, the door opened softly. Lauren appeared, dressed sharply but carrying the air of someone who'd lost the rhythm of the room. "I just wanted to," she began, but her voice faltered when she saw Victor, Pat, and Eleanor together. "I came to ask if you needed me to oversee the Foundation's next presentation." Eleanor regarded her calmly. "That won't be necessary. I've already assigned that to Sophie Kim." Lauren froze, her expression momentarily breaking. "Sophie? She's in finance." "She's also reliable," Eleanor said evenly, "and discreet." The silence that followed was surgical. Lauren swallowed hard, offering a tight nod before stepping back toward the door. "Understood." Pat's gaze followed her with quiet satisfaction. "It's strange," she murmured after Lauren left. "How people only realize their place when the room stops adjusting for them." Eleanor gave a small smile. Entitlement fades fastest in the dark. Victor closed his folder and stood. "On a brighter note, there's something else you should know. You've received another media inquiry." Eleanor arched an eyebrow. "From whom?" He handed her a sleek printed email. The letterhead read, "American Legacy Magazine. They're dedicating their June issue to multi-generational leadership," Victor explained. "They want to feature you, personally." The article title is still tentative, but they mentioned phrases like family empire, female mastery, and strategic patience. They called it an American matriarch story done right. Pat's laugh was low and genuine. "Oh, they're going to love that." Eleanor set the paper down, thoughtful. "Interesting choice of words." Victor smiled. "You've earned it." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned toward the window where the city sprawled beneath her, glass and steel and willpower made visible. "I've spent a lifetime making sure the word earned means something," she said finally. "If they want to tell that story, they'll have to tell it truthfully." Pat raised an eyebrow. "You're actually considering it?" "I'm considering what truth serves me best," Eleanor said. "Narratives are currency, Pat. The trick is owning the story before someone else spends it for you." Victor smiled approvingly. I can manage the outreach if you'd like me to handle it. Eleanor nodded once. Yes. Schedule it. Lauren's reflection lingered faintly in the window behind her, just a ghostly shape crossing the hall outside. The faint click of her heels faded into nothing. Pat leaned closer. You know she'll read every word of that article when it prints. I'm counting on it, Eleanor said softly. A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, clouds drifted lazily over the skyline, the afternoon light painting the glass towers gold. Pat broke the quiet with a smile. It's strange, isn't it? You started all this with a family dinner. A mockery, a moment. And now look at them. They've learned everything except humility. Eleanor's voice was steady, almost tender. Humility can't be taught. It's the scar left by lessons you ignored. Pat studied her friend for a moment, then laughed quietly. You're poetic when you win. Eleanor smiled faintly. I've had years to practice. Victor gathered his papers. I'll finalize the magazine arrangements. Expect a call from their editor this week. As he left, the room fell into a soft hush. Eleanor stood, walking to the window, the city sprawling endlessly beneath her. Every building, every success, every controlled outcome, it all reflected back at her in quiet affirmation. Legacy, she whispered, more to herself than to Pat. It's not about who inherits, it's about who endures. Behind her, Pat's phone buzzed. She checked it, eyes widening slightly. Eleanor, she said, her voice catching. The magazine just posted their announcement online. They've called the feature The Matriarch and the Machine, Eleanor Parker's Empire of Quiet Command. It's already trending. Eleanor turned from the window, her expression calm, her gaze sharp. Then let them watch. Pat grinned. You enjoy this more than you admit. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper, her smile curving like the edge of a blade. No, Pat. I just enjoy when people finally see what was always mine. The Parker estate was quiet again, eerily so. The kind of quiet that follows when every battle has been won and the world has finally caught up to the truth. Outside, spring light flickered through the old oak trees, scattering gold across the marble floors. Inside, Eleanor Parker sat by the window in her library, the air perfumed with jasmine and paper. The latest issue of American Legacy magazine lay open on the coffee table, its glossy pages glinting in the afternoon sun. Her face, composed, deliberate, framed by silver hair and a measured half-smile, filled the cover. Eleanor Parker, the architect of American restraint. She'd read it only once. That was enough. The story had done exactly what it was meant to. Sealed her narrative, polished her myth. Words like discipline, foresight, and matriarchal precision flowed through the article like a hymn. The piece painted her not as ruthless, but as resolute. Not as cunning, but as composed. She had let them write her as a mystery with grace. Across the city, people still whispered about her empire, about the woman who'd turned a family insult into a generational legacy. Board members quoted her in meetings. Young executives studied her methods like scripture. And Nathan and Lauren, well, they had learned the cost of underestimation. Eleanor turned the magazine over, her attention caught by the faint reflection of herself in the window pane. She looked neither triumphant nor sentimental, only steady. Time had tempered her into something stronger than satisfaction, something quieter, sharper. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Pat entered, carrying a silver tray of tea and lemon shortbread. You're on the cover of every lobby and waiting room in Atlanta, she said cheerfully, setting the tray down. Victor says the calls haven't stopped since the article dropped. Eleanor smiled faintly. Victor enjoys being the gatekeeper. It makes him feel useful. Pat laughed softly. You're impossible to flatter. I don't believe in flattery. Eleanor replied. Only reinforcement. They sat together, the steam from their teacups curling like pale ribbon between them. Pat glanced at the open magazine. You've won, Ellie. You've rewritten the ending. Eleanor shook her head. I didn't rewrite it. I just made sure no one else could. Victor's voice arrived through the speakerphone a few moments later. Smooth, efficient, always precise. Mrs. Parker, I wanted to inform you that all legal protections remain in full force. The trusts, estates, and corporate structures have been renewed for another cycle. The foundation remains insulated from both internal and external influence. Permanent? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Permanent, Victor said. Irrevocable by design. Pat raised her teacup slightly. To permanence, she said. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. To strategy. Victor chuckled faintly through the speaker. You've built something impossible to dismantle, Eleanor. Even I couldn't unthread it if I tried. Then I've done my job, she said. Thank you, Victor. Enjoy the calm while it lasts. When the call ended, the silence returned, soft but full. Outside, the late sun dipped toward the horizon, gilding the room in amber. Pat poured another cup of tea and leaned back in her chair, her tone gentle. You could stop now, you know. No one would blame you for resting. Eleanor's lips curved. Resting is just a slower form of planning. Pat smiled knowingly. Then what's next? Eleanor reached for the leather-bound notebook on her desk, flipping to a fresh page. The first line, written in her meticulous script, read, Next allocation, educational trusts for women's enterprise. I'll expand the foundation's reach, she said quietly. Endow scholarships, fund mentorship programs, build a pipeline of leaders who won't ask for permission. Pat's voice softened. You're creating heirs to your philosophy, not your fortune. Eleanor looked up, meeting her gaze. The former lasts longer. A gentle breeze moved through the open window, rustling the curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 5, steady, methodical, much like her life's rhythm. Nathan and Lauren hadn't called since the magazine came out. Not that she'd expected them to. Their absence was its own admission of defeat. They would remain part of her empire, of course. Visibly included, invisibly irrelevant. Pat took a slow sip of tea, her tone half-teasing. Do you ever think about forgiving them? Not for their sake, for yours? Eleanor's gaze returned to the horizon. Forgiveness is for people who want peace, she said softly. I prefer control. Pat chuckled. Then you've achieved exactly what you wanted. Eleanor smiled faintly. Not yet. She stood, crossing to the window. The reflection that stared back was ageless in its composure. The city stretched before her, lights flickering on one by one as dusk fell, a living monument to endurance. Pat followed her gaze. You know, she said, most people would envy this kind of peace. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. Peace is only enviable to those who don't understand what it costs. Pat studied her friend for a moment, then asked quietly, And what does it cost, Ellie? Eleanor's answer came without hesitation. Everything worth owning. The room fell silent again, save for the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Then, her phone buzzed. A single message illuminated the screen. Unknown number. Your legacy piece was inspiring. We'd like to meet. Our organization specializes in strategic acquisitions under the guise of philanthropy. Perhaps a partnership? Eleanor's hand lingered on the phone. Her lips curved. Not with alarm, but with recognition. Pat noticed the shift in her eyes. Who is it this time? Eleanor set the phone down, her tone deceptively calm. Someone who doesn't understand what kind of game they've just entered. Pat smiled. Another storm? Eleanor turned back toward the window, the first flicker of lightning flashing on the distant skyline. No, she said softly. A mirror. The morning of the board anniversary dawned clear and warm, the kind of spring morning Atlanta only grants to those who've earned it. Eleanor Parker stood before her vanity mirror, fastening a single strand of pearls. Nothing flashy, just deliberate. Her reflection regarded her steadily, the same composed face that had once endured humiliation at a family dinner, now the face that defined a dynasty. Today wasn't a battle. It was the coronation she'd built brick by brick in silence. At Parker Holdings headquarters, the air was expectant. Reporters milled in the lobby, photographers arranging tripods, and employees, young, old, loyal, newly converted, all waiting for the matriarch who had become both myth and mentor. Eleanor's car pulled up quietly at the private entrance. Sophie Kim was there, greeting her with a small, reverent smile. "Everything's ready, Mrs. Parker. The press is set up in the atrium. Victor wanted to brief you before the presentation." "Of course," Eleanor said, stepping out, her heels echoing with calm precision on the marble floor. Upstairs, the executive suite buzzed with a controlled energy. Victor Lane, ever the consummate professional, stood waiting with a folder in hand. Pat was beside him, calm as always, radiating that quiet satisfaction of someone who'd seen the entire chess game play out. Victor adjusted his tie. "All corporate and foundation protections have been re-verified. The media piece will air immediately after your speech. You're untouchable, Eleanor." She smiled faintly. "That's a good word. Untouchable. I like that one." Pat poured coffee into 2 cups, her tone light. "You've earned every syllable." Across the hall, Nathan and Lauren arrived, dressed impeccably, faces composed, but their posture told the truth. Nathan's confidence had thinned into humility. Lauren's spark had dulled into calculation she could no longer afford to show. "Mother," Nathan greeted carefully, "the place looks beautiful. You've outdone yourself." "It's not beauty I aim for, Nathan," Eleanor replied smoothly. "It's order." Lauren's smile was polite, brittle. "You've certainly created that." Eleanor met her eyes without a flicker. "It's amazing what happens when the right person writes the rules." The tension between them was soft but undeniable, like the hum before a lightning strike. Victor stepped in to shift the moment. "Mrs. Parker, the press conference begins in 5. Eleanor nodded once and moved toward the glass doors of the atrium. Beyond them, hundreds of employees and guests waited. Executives, clients, local officials, even a few members of the media who had once dismissed her as a figurehead. When she entered, the crowd rose instinctively. The applause was not loud, it was reverent. She walked to the podium, each step an assertion of patience rewarded, strategy perfected. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying across the wide marble room, warm but precise. 40 years ago, this company began as a small consultancy with 3 employees and one belief: that endurance matters more than ego. I've spent a lifetime proving that belief true." Lauren and Nathan stood near the front, listening, silent and still. Eleanor continued, "I've watched this business grow, falter, and rise again, because we never mistook noise for progress. We stayed patient, we stayed deliberate, and when arrogance tried to replace discipline," her gaze lingered briefly, knowingly, "we corrected course." The audience murmured softly, approvingly. Victor, standing to the side, observed the room with the same quiet pride as a general who'd lived to see victory declared. Eleanor paused, the faintest smile touching her lips. Today marks not just the anniversary of a company, it marks a reminder. Power isn't a performance, it's patience, layered over time until no one remembers when it began. The applause that followed was thunderous. Pat leaned slightly toward Victor. "She's not speaking to them, you know," she whispered. "She's speaking to the ghosts." Victor smiled. And winning. After the speech, guests crowded near, shaking Eleanor's hand, congratulating her. Lauren and Nathan hung back. When the crowd thinned, Lauren stepped forward, her voice softer than before. "You've made your point," she said, trying for grace. "Everyone sees it now." Eleanor's expression was kind, almost maternal. "No, Lauren, they finally understand it. Seeing is easy. Understanding takes time." Nathan nodded slowly. "You built something none of us could have imagined." Eleanor touched his arm gently. "That's because I didn't build it to be imagined. I built it to be real, and to last." Pat joined them, handing Eleanor her tea. "You know, it's funny," she said, smiling. "After all these years, it feels like the very beginning." Eleanor looked toward the atrium windows, where sunlight poured across the Parker Holdings insignia etched in glass. "It is the beginning," she said softly, "the kind where you already know how the ending goes." Victor approached one last time. "The Foundation's next round of allocations has been approved," he said. "And your magazine follow-up piece, Legacy in Motion, will go live tomorrow morning." Eleanor nodded. "Good. Let them read." Lauren and Nathan exchanged a quiet glance, the weight of finality clear in both their eyes. Whatever illusion of influence they once held was gone, replaced by reluctant admiration and a silence they couldn't articulate. The applause from the atrium still echoed faintly as Eleanor and Pat stepped into the elevator together. Pat turned, her eyes gleaming. "It's strange to think it all started with a single insult." Eleanor smiled, slow and satisfied. "Strange? No. Predictable." The elevator doors began to close, and through the narrowing space the Empire glittered. Her empire, alive, unassailable, permanent. Pat lifted her teacup in a quiet toast. "To victory?" Eleanor met her gaze. "To foresight." The elevator chimed softly as it descended. When they reached the car, Eleanor paused to look back through the glass foyer one last time. The marble, the skyline, the name etched above the entrance in silver letters, Parker Holdings. A memory flickered. Lauren's laugh that night at the family dinner, sharp and condescending. The sting that had started it all. Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile as she whispered just for herself. "She mocked me at the family party. I quietly built the empire she works for,